Hello and welcome back to another awesome episode of the Bible in 1 Year with the Preacher's Husband. Today we're talking about Judges. We're into the book of Judges for the first time. Now, there's no author really named for the book of Judges, but the Jewish tradition assigned it Samuel as the writer. So we could go with that, or we could just go that it's the book of Judges. It's just the stories of the judges. The events described in Judges are to be dated from around 1350 to 1050 BC. So, if they were recorded by Samuel, it would have had to have been written around 1050 BC because that's when he was alive. So, a little bit of a summary of the book of Judges to start out with. The book of Judges falls into three parts. The first part is a prologue that deals with the failure of the second generation to press on with the conquest of Canaan. That's what chapters 1 through 3. And then a sixfold cycle of sin and salvation through a deliverer or a judge that God raised up. That's chapter 3 verse 7 through chapter 16 verse 31. And then the third part is an appendix that shows the full effects of total depravity let loose upon the people. That's chapter 17 through 21. The first people sinned against the Lord and fell into idolatry. Second, now these are the steps that happened along the way. Second, the Lord raised up an adversary to afflict them and turn them back to him. Third, the people cried out to the Lord in repentance. And fourth, the Lord brought deliverance from them through a judge whom he raised up, even though he was seriously flawed. Now, some people say it's a six-layer, six-fold cycle of sin and salvation. Some say four, so that's why I showed you the four. But this here is the six-fold cycle of sin in Judges. Basically, peace in the land of Israel, and they serve the Lord. Then Israel does evil in the eyes of the Lord. Then God punishes Israel, and Israel is enslaved. Then Israel cries out to the Lord. Then God raises up a judge, and then Israel is delivered. So that's about how the cycle works. A little bit of food for thought. Judges illustrates the fundamental problem of the human heart. When God's people forget his saving acts, they go after other gods. Judges makes clear the link between spiritual commitment and ethical conduct. In other words, when you are not committed spiritually to God, then your conduct tends to reflect that. You tend to be less ethical in your actions. But when you are committed spiritually to God, your conduct reflects that as well. You begin to be more ethical and more doing the right things. So that's a good takeaway. Another takeaway is when everyone is allowed to do whatever he or she wants without any controls placed on them, the result will be moral and spiritual chaos for both the individual and society. In other words, rules, structure, and accountability, those things are extremely important. They really are. And the Bible gives us those. God gives us those. Chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Judges is what we're going through tonight. And chapter 1 starts out with Judah's leadership against the Canaanites. In verse 6 it says, when Adoni-Bezek fled, they pursued him, caught him, and cut off his thumbs and big toe. Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to pick up scraps under my table. God has repaid me for what I have done. They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. I thought that was kind of interesting. It kind of goes along with the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth theme that's in the Bible, in the Old Testament. Now, you remember Caleb, when he said, whoever attacks and captures Kiriath Sefer, I will give my daughter Aksha to him as a wife. So Othniel, the son of Kenaz, captured it, and Caleb gave his daughter Aksha to him as his wife. Now, there's a specific reason why he is mentioned again here in chapter 1 of Judges, and that's because in chapter 3 we're going to find out that Othniel would later become the very first of Israel's judges. We'll read about that tomorrow in chapter 3. Now we move on to verse 21, where Benjamin fails. The Benjaminites failed to basically run out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. We talked about that already. Now, why did they not do that? They did not follow God's direction. Then we read more about the success of the house of Joseph. Israel's failure in their other tribes comes along in this story. Manasseh failed to take possession of their areas. The Canaanites, they were very determined to stay in the land. They didn't want to leave. So they kind of beat them, but they didn't give up. The Israelites became stronger over time, and then they made the Canaanites serve them as forced labor, but they never drove them out like God told them. And then, of course, we're explained about the pattern of sin and judgment that happens in chapter 2. Verse 2, it says, "You are not to make a covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You are to tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed me. What is this that you have done? I will not drive out these people before you. They will be thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a trap for you." Somebody else had a thorn in their side in the New Testament, didn't they? Paul. There may be something to that, huh? All right. Then we get to Joshua's death, and this is a recap of Joshua's death through the end and what happened right after that. Basically, the next generation after Joshua died without a successor, so to speak. There was no one in charge. Basically, God was the leader, and there was not a human person on earth guiding the Israelites as a whole. They were all separated into their factions now, and it was somewhat of a leadership vacuum from my perspective here. And the Israelites did exactly what God said they would. A generation grew up and did not know the Lord or the works that he had done. And the Israelites started to do what was evil in the sights of the Lord. They started worshiping other gods, just like he said they would. And they angered him, and they abandoned God. So he sold them to their enemies. Whenever the Israelites went out, the Lord was against them and brought disaster on them. Anytime they had decided to go to war with somebody, they lose, just as he had promised and swore to them. So they suffered a lot. And then God would raise up a judge who would save them from the power of their marauders. But they did not listen to their judges all the time either. When that happened, the same thing would happen. They would fall again. But typically God would give this judge his authority to lead and to make judgments on the people, and he would guide them in the right direction, and they would prosper again up until the point where the judge died, and then the cycle starts all over again. Now verse 21 says, "I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations Joshua left when he died. I did this to test Israel and to see whether or not they would keep the Lord's way by walking in it as their fathers." Now I've got a quick question for you. And that question today is, do you think that God still tests you today? What do you think? Do you think God still tests people today and puts us to the test? I've heard some people say that God doesn't test you. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. But clearly in the Bible, God tested the Israelites. And on multiple occasions, God says, this is a test. This is me testing you for such and such. Do you think they still do today? I'll leave that up to you to answer in the comments. I hope this has touched you. If it has, hit the like button, the subscribe button. Of course, click the little jingle bell so you can get notified the next time I upload a video, which will be tomorrow when we go over Judges chapter 3, 4, and 5. I will see you then.